Hello and welcome to our talk Doing Things Together. I'm Enrico.
I'm Ulrike.
And a lot of this talk grew from conversation that we've had, so we're doing this together. Carlo Maria Cipolla was an Italian economic historian, and in 1976 he wrote an essay called The Basic Laws of Human Stupidity. And the essay contains a graph that I find an interesting way to look at people's behavior. The graph has two axes. In the horizontal one, it goes from losses to others to benefits to others, and the vertical one goes from losses to oneself to benefit to oneself. And when you have benefit to yourself and benefit to others, it's the quadrant of what Cipolla calls intelligent people. When it's benefit to oneself but losses to others, it's the quadrant that Cipolla calls bandits. Whereas when you lose yourself and you benefit to others, it's the helpless quadrant, and losses to oneself and losses to others is the stupid quadrant. And at the origin of the graphs where there's neither benefit nor losses, it's ineffectual people. And I find it an interesting way to look at people's behavior. I mean, I'm looking at behavior, I'm not looking at people. People in different times behave intelligently, stupidly, and all sorts of things depending on situations and everything. But like, take for example face masks, and you wear them in indoor public spaces. It's a bit inconvenient, but it prevents spreading COVID to others and helps limit the spread of the pandemic, which is kind of what one wants. So I think wearing a mask still, like among others, still is on somewhere on the benefit to oneself, and definitely is on the benefit to others, so one would say it's an intelligent thing to do. And not wearing a mask, especially in public, causes losses to others and a bit of a loss to oneself. So we're going in between the bandit and quite a bit towards the stupid. But unfortunately, when I go out at the moment, even though the cases of COVID are increasing where I am, people still don't wear masks, which brings to Cipolla's fundamental law of stupidity number 5, which says a stupid person is the most dangerous kind of person. But besides analogs with face masks and jokes and something, I found that Cipolla's graph has something in common with another graph I used in my talk in DebConf 17, which is the Thomas Kilmann conflict styles graph. And the vertical axis is the same. It goes from loss to oneself to benefit to oneself, while the horizontal axis is different. It's not about benefit or losses to others. It's about investing or not investing in the relationship. And this idea of investing in the relationship, I find it kind of interesting, especially it reminds me of the iterated prisoner dilemma. There's a nice game online, there's URL in the slide, and there will be in the slide notes, you can go and play. Basically, if you deal with a person once, you don't care about building a relationship with them. Like, if you run a tourist trap business, you know that the people from every corner of the world that come and have an ice cream in your ice cream shop in Venice, they're not coming back. They're there that day, and the next day they'll be in Pisa taking a photo with the Leaning Tower. So you don't really care about giving them the right change or giving them a nice amount of ice cream and so on. You just maximize your amount of money. Whereas if you work with someone over a long time, you do want to focus on the relationship. So the idea of the prisoner dilemma is that if you run the game once, it pays if you cheat. It is the rational thing to do, but if you play with the same people multiple times, you need to build a relationship, you need to build trust to actually maximize the outcomes. There's a beautiful talk, a TED talk by Frans de Waal, that shows various ways in which this also goes on beyond humans, and that will also be in the talk notes. So this prisoner's dilemma, iterated prisoner dilemma, is, I find it quite relevant to the idea of building on the relationship. And I want to make it clear that the two graphs are not the same. We are talking about 3 different axes. I don't want to imply that by putting the graph side by side that everybody who competes is a bandit and everybody who cooperates is intelligent and everybody who compromises is ineffectual and everybody who doesn't care is stupid or something. Sometimes it happens, but it's not the point of the graph. The point is to show 3 different important aspects of collaboration: benefit to oneself, benefit to others, and maintaining a healthy relationship. 3 distinct axes. For example, there can be intelligent behavior that does not focus at all in the relationship, like when upstream makes a new version which has fancy new feature that nobody asked for, but still they benefit to themselves because clearly they care about those, and we all get some new features, so there is some benefit to us, but maybe that one nasty bug of the fact that everybody still hasn't been fixed. So that's something that benefits to upstream, benefits to the user, but doesn't build much of a relationship with the users. Or if somebody offers you a deal that you cannot refuse, it may be beneficial to both, and yet you feel uneasy, you lost agency. It's all very intelligent, and it could be wise to limit dealings with that person. Or we could all get very stupidly drunk and trash the house and end up hurt and regretting every moment, with a big loss to oneself and a big loss to all the others that are with us, and yet we may all end up much closer friends than we were before. So it's all been blatantly stupid and with a lot of benefit to the relationship. I do not suggest that this could be a good way to build a relationship. Competition, instead, is what we grow up in most societies. You got competitive games, best mark in the class, top 10 music charts, podium at every sport event. At least where I come from, we studied history based on wars, who won, who lost, who got their enemies killed first, la la la. In competition, if you don't get what you want, you escalate. You put in more energy, you fight harder, you face down your opponent. Society has a twisted perception of success. If you are a seller and you can get anyone to buy your stuff at the price you want, they say you are a good seller, I say you are a scammer. If you are dating and you can get a person to come to bed with you whether they like it or not, they say you are a good lover, I say you are an abuser. Sometimes, however, competition is easier. If you're getting what you need, why should you care what others are or aren't getting? If you are getting what you need anyway, why should you invest energy in growing a healthy relationship? And this kind of feels like privilege, doesn't it? You are getting what you want anyway. You can forget that the others should get something. You can forget about having a good relationship with others. Why do you need to bother? You are getting what you want anyway. Why aren't we all high in the benefit to ourselves quadrant? What makes us stupid, helpless, avoidant, accommodating, ineffectual, compromising? We're all different that way. We all have some aspects of our characters that make us go somehow away from the top maximum rational thing we can possibly do.
So different people do different things differently. I would like to introduce a concept that I learned about in the mediation training I'm currently following, which is called the drivers. The psychologist Taibi Kahler has identified common patterns of what motivates us, and he calls those our drivers. We learn in early childhood to conform our behavior to the expectations of the adults around us, our parents, our teachers, or other attachment figures. If parents never allowed our child selves to cry, or if they do not listen to our needs, we might construct the inner belief that we need to be strong and that we can never ask for help. When we face stress or need to solve problems as adults, we rely on these unconscious scripts that we learned in childhood. Drivers, as identified by Kahler, are not personality types. They are simply inner dynamics. A bit like superpowers. They bring positive aspects and negative aspects. They can be more or less pronounced at different times. In general, they become difficult or problematic in times of stress. So there are 5 drivers. Like in Dungeons and Dragons, each driver comes with its powers and weaknesses. The 5 drivers are: be perfect, that would correspond to the wizard. Be strong, that would correspond to the fighter. Hurry up, that would correspond to the rogue. Please others, which would correspond to the bard. And try hard, that corresponds to the paladin. You can find tests and questionnaires on the internet to test which driver or which drivers are the ones that drive you. I'm going to introduce these drivers a bit now, starting with be perfect. So the imperative of people with this driver is: I must be perfect, wonderful, and correct. I must succeed. I must win. People with this driver work accurately and know well how to organize work. In stress situations, however, they cannot set priorities, and when everything needs to be perfect, there's generally no good enough. As an example, I could go to someone with this driver and say, hey, I would like to help with task X. And then this person would reply, okay, here's a list of requirements, and then I get an endless list. If I'm not discouraged by then I can start working on the task, and then I will get back another endless list of reviewer nitpicks, making me feel like I'm really not good enough. What we see in Debian really often is that people try to make incremental improvement proposals to something which get blocked for the reason of not being perfect or leaving out some obscure corner case. The please others driver has the imperative: I must make other people happy and proud of me. Only others can validate my work, and if they don't, I failed. People with this driver are generally the social glue in a group and truly interested in cooperation. But on the negative side of things, they have a hard time saying no and a hard time protecting their boundaries. As an example, on Monday, we need to hold a webinar on the shiny big blue button server that I just installed. The coordinator was on vacation and created the accounts only on Friday. She notices there are issues with some accounts and writes me an email. We really need to do this today, otherwise we are in a deep mess on Monday. I think, well, I have a full work day today and tomorrow is weekend. I have set up everything 2 weeks ago. But I feel responsible for others, and suddenly, with the please others driver, I compromise and I put this thing first, going over my own priorities and my own boundaries, which causes me stress and anger, and takes away the weekend that I needed to relax. The be strong driver has the imperative: I must not show weakness. I cannot ask for help. People with this driver are reliable and steady, not easily moved, but they never show feelings and they never ask for help. In Debian, be strongs are the professional yak shavers. Yak shaving is an apparently unrelated activity needed to solve a larger problem. For example, they might see that some code does not compile, trace down a bug in the code, fix it, then find a bug in the compiler, search for the bug in the compiler, fix that, and when their code finally compiles, they have a bug to track down in a library they use. At this point, they have spent a frustrating week on a task that was supposed to take 4 hours, after which they could have asked for help and eventually have found a rubber duck, someone to explain the problem to, hitting on the solution in the process. Or they could have found a different workaround. The try-hard driver has the imperative that I cannot refuse requests. I must always try my best. People with this driver are enthusiastic, attentive, and tenacious. They volunteer for many projects, and they tend, unfortunately, to turn small tasks into major projects. They are very hard on themselves and others. They are the people who start a project, and when it starts to work, they move over to another one for another problem that needs solving. And the last driver is hurry up. The imperative of people with this driver is so much to do, so little time. They are very fast at grasping and understanding problems. They work fast, but when they do that, they make a lot of small mistakes. Then they run from meeting to meeting or from job to job. They're late in the meeting. They're like, oh my God, I have to run to the next meeting. So they're quite impatient, and they appear as always busy. They're the people who maintain 5,000 packages but have a hard time answering bug reports and fixing root causes. Now, it is probable that you might find out that you have not only one strong driver, but 2 or even 3. As an example, the be perfect and the please others drivers seem to often go together. If you find this, think about how these 2 might influence each other. How a request to do work on the weekend and your desire to do this work perfectly might drive you into accepting unacceptable conditions, and how this creates stress and contributes to burnout. So, cooperation may be hard when people with specific drivers work together. For example, when a person with a hurry-up driver has to work with a be perfect, there are quite naturally conflicting expectations, and therefore having these 2 work together can create a lot of conflict. The same goes for the combination try hard and be perfect. The try hard constantly starts new projects, but the be perfect wants to plan a project in detail before even starting to work on it. Now you might say, okay, well, then I'll do the exact contrary from now on. And you might want to find yourself an anti-driver. However, turning to the contrary behavior, the anti-driver, will not fundamentally change how we work together. When you go from be perfect to its anti-driver, I don't care, you're still obsessing about perfection. This is because driver and anti-driver are actually 2 sides of the same medal. So the be strong driver obsesses about distance, hurry up and its anti-driver don't rush me both obsess about time awareness. Please others and its anti-driver I don't care about you obsess about empathy, and try hard's anti-driver there, I fixed it, obsess about stamina. Okay, so we're flawed. We apparently are. So what do we do with this information? Well, I think it's really good to be aware of one's own drivers and to identify one's behaviors and patterns, in particular patterns that repeat themselves. We can then try to think about how our drivers manifest and how they interact, or how they even exacerbate each other. We can find out how they contribute to stress and how they might even fuel burnout. And a second step in a team or in an organization can be to actually set up guidelines for successful cooperation so that we don't run into the same problems related to drivers over and over again. For example, one could define what is needed to start a new project while still allowing all the tryhards to experiment and make lots of prototypes. Or one can set up coding guidelines and Git hooks in order to avoid a clash between the be perfect and the hurry up who makes mistakes. Guidelines for respecting people's weekends and evenings in different time zones can help protecting the boundaries of the people pleasers. One can set up regular checks to see if expectations to solve an issue need to be readjusted in order to avoid the be strongs to be stuck for too long by themselves. In summary, we asked what happens when you run out of energy. Well, that depends on what are your drivers and ingrained patterns. We are a community of people with all sorts of different drivers and motivations, which sometimes get into conflict. And that brings us to the next topic, which is conflict. We live in a society in which disagreement, disapproval, and disharmony are frowned upon. But disagreement, disapproval, and disharmony are inevitable. We can see them as being the fuel for change. After all, disagreement and disapproval brought us paid vacation, women's right to vote, and other societal changes. If we do not acknowledge the 3 Ds, a situation of disagreement, disapproval, or disharmony can turn into conflict. Now, the most important thing to know about conflict is that conflicts happen. If you're having conflicts, it does not mean that you're a bad person or that you are not perfect. Conflict is like an alarm in a monitoring tool. Generally, when we see that alarm, we want to understand. We want to understand conflict and turn it into a bug report that we can act upon. Thereby, we acknowledge its existence. Now, let's not get confused by the use of the word conflict. We're not talking about nuclear conflicts here. conflict doesn't mean that one person shouts the loudest and the longest and escalates everything until they get exactly what they want the way they want it. A conflict that can be turned from an alarm into a bug report is the first part of a solution. If we don't acknowledge conflict, we don't allow solutions. Not acknowledging conflict, avoiding it, can be a tentative to maintain or restore harmony, or a tentative to end an already existing conflict. Avoiding means changing the subject, delaying a discussion indefinitely, avoiding a person altogether, or not bringing up the subject of contention at all. When trying to avoid conflict, some people stay silent, and that is their means to end conflict. However, the effect of this silence can actually be to escalate the conflict by denying the other party the right to be heard, to be acknowledged, to receive feedback or validation. Using the Thomas Kilmann graph that we've seen earlier, conflict avoidance actually creates a lose-lose situation.
So, here's an example of conflict avoidance meeting perfectionism in Debian. Say there's a problem to solve, and the perfectionists are battling it to the death. The please others try to assume good intentions and excuse people's losses of temper. The be strongs are busy debugging their hard toolchain issues. The tryhards get ideas for fixing unrelated problems and go making prototypes. The hurry-ups get bored and go read 25 other mailing list threads, submit 8 patches, get 5 rejected, try to fix them and submit 6 more. Eventually, everyone has retreated from the fight, saying, whatever, do it your way, except one, who gets to have it their way. In all this, benefit to others is incidental, and there is a loss in the relationship, and this gives us acceptance through attrition rather than through consensus. And another thing that's common in free software projects is structuring as a founders and helpers kind of thing, where somebody started a project and became naturally the leader of it because, well, they were the only person working on it. And then somehow there's a little community around it starts to grow with people sending patches, kind of trying to help this development. And it gets to what we sometimes see like benevolent dictator for life kind of structures. So if you look at the Thomas Kilmann graph, the leader will probably be up on the benefit to oneself thing often, and then also benefit to others if they are intelligent. Not necessarily benefit to the relationship is kind of irrelevant at this point because we have a person working alone. When people start contributing, they will probably be reasonably low in the benefit to themselves. A little bit, yes, because, well, otherwise why they're there, but there will probably be a lot of compromise, a lot of accommodation because, well, they are on somebody else's turf. And maybe they will try to do something benefit to the relationship, to try to feel part of the developers of this project somehow. And this is not inherently bad. For many small kind of projects, this may be all that needed. You will have focus because you have a person who has the vision, the long-term vision about things, and get some help. So it's a bit better than the person alone. But this does not scale beyond the capacity of the rockstar leader thing to exercise control over the community, tell people always what to do and how to do it, and, vetting the choices, saying, no, you don't want to do that because then you break that thing that only I know that I want to do in the future, do it the other way instead, that sort of thing. Another issue is the projects get identified with the leaders and they're limited by the limits of the leaders. For example, Free Software Foundation, I think it used to be a community of people helping Stallman, and the Linux kernel mailing list a community of people helping Linus Torvalds. But at some point, the limits of the founders became the limits of the whole community, or the community grew to a point where the limit of the founders were too much of a constraint, and it became a problem. If you find yourself at the center of a group of people, who, even if they're long-term developers, are there to help you, ask you all the questions, ask you for direction all the time, you might be in this situation. And maybe you don't want to be in that situation. Maybe the project wants to scale. And for example, I haven't heard people having obvious problems with my personality, but I find myself in various degrees in such a position on NM Debian.org, contributors Debian.org, DebTags Debian.org. And those projects are limited by my personal limits. And it could be insecurity, lack of time, lack of focus, personal likes or dislikes, and personal priorities. But I'm sometimes afraid that I am a limit to how those projects could scale. And sometimes a project may want to grow a community and not have a buzz factor of 1. I don't want to be in the way of others who might want to be part of an M or contributors or DebTags development and its growth. And if I keep a strong leadership, if everything's identified with me and my sense of direction only, people who could be other drivers in the development of these projects are driven away. It could also be that a project has a critical place in a community. For example, NM Debian.org has a critical place in Debian, and I don't want that my ideas about how NM Debian.org should look like be the only way of joining Debian. There's also sometimes some kind of political interest or social interest in taking a project beyond a leader and helpers kind of thing towards something that is a bit more community driven or has a broader kind of leadership. You can try to turn this situation into a situation where more people are in charge of things, and you can try as the person who has all the know-how, you can try to help the people instead of direct them. Help, give them what they need, not give them guidance. Tell them what to do, but give them the information they need to do what it is that they want to do. Although getting help and onboarding people has a risk of turning you into a kind of project manager person or human resources person, which might or may not be what you want. And this could be the Peter principle, where you raise to your maximum level of incompetence and then you get stuck there because maybe you are in for development and then you become a human resources person and you do that really badly and you lose motivation because it's not really your goal, and then you're stuck into something that doesn't really work for you. Maybe you may try encouraging others not just to help technically but to lead or manage. And be mindful of the things that you feel that you are comfortable doing and be conscious that some other things don't work for you. Unfortunately, I think that we lack narratives and models for growing projects beyond this kind of BDFL structure, leader structure thing, and I would like to see more. In Debian, we've often talked about imposter syndrome, and there's a lot of excellent people in Debian, and one doesn't always feel as perfect as everybody else seems to be. One doesn't want to get in the way, ruin the party, or say something or push a code change that one might regret. And fair enough, in some online projects especially, sometimes people have been at the end of pretty aggressive put-downs that will be archived by the internet forever. And I don't want it to happen to me. If the well-respected, sometimes highly adored person write an email saying you are really stupid, and it goes archived online, and then people find it in search engines when you look for a job, then, maybe you shouldn't have written that mail in the first place, even if they were wrong, but you are the one paying the consequence. I think imposter syndrome also has some aspect of wanting to invest in the relationship before looking at benefit to myself to make sure that the relationship is safe enough for me to participate actively. So in this kind of imposter syndrome situation, you focus on the relationship, you don't focus on benefit to yourself, you don't know yet if you can have that, if you deserve that. So you stay in an accommodation you win, I lose sort of thing, and concede and try to, not be in the way. So you let others work, you limit the benefit to yourself, you don't get acknowledged, you don't get validated. If we have a lot of that, we are not building something together. Some other people are building something for some other people, and you are trying not to get in the way for now. And it's interesting because this is not only happening, I think, to new developers. Some time ago, someone reported a light DM bug where the video wouldn't switch on after the lock screen engaged. And you could kind of get it back if you switch to a text console with like Ctrl-Alt F1 and then back to Ctrl-Alt F7 or F8 or however the whole. And it was interesting because I've seen many old-time developers, including me, who replied, "Oh, that's been happening to me too for years, and I thought it was just a glitch of my hardware. I never thought of reporting it." So even people who have been in Debian for a long time, who had a bug that affected them multiple times a day, ended up just shutting up because maybe it's just me. And I find that very interesting. Another thing we have a lot in Debian is arguments. And it would be nice to have conversations instead. So sometimes so an argument is more like a confrontational discussion in which we are mostly interested in finding out who is right. And sometimes we have a conversation where we build on each other's ideas towards an agreement or a shared strategy. It's kind of interesting that we reverse this in our voting system. Like normally a voting system is pretty much like a football match where you play the game and you see who won. And in Debian, it's interesting because the part of the discussion before the voting is actually a conversation, a cooperation thing where you try to put things on the ballot that build on everybody's ideas. So yeah, the voting is a voting, but for me the what to put on the ballot, the process to put things on the ballot is much more interesting because that is a moment in which we really do some nice cooperation. And then how to get from a conversation to cooperation. There is an interesting book called Getting to Yes that has a kind of 5-step program. So that they propose a 5-step program: separate the people from the problem, focus on interest not position, invent options for mutual gain, insist on using objective criteria, and know your best alternative to negotiated agreement. We'll go through them one by one. Separate the people from the problem. So people have values, cultural backgrounds, and emotions that vary widely. And they could help or get in the way of building trust and understanding. I could make the mistake of guessing your intention based on my own fears, for example. And to make a practical example, I have just posted a Debian project about not required meeting in person to sign keys. And I feel like I'm opening up Pandora's box because I'm poking at a decade-long established practice and rituals that are almost the foundations of interactions in Debian. And I'm very afraid of what's going to happen in that thread. I know I'll have to reread replies many times over to be able to understand what people are actually writing beyond my fear of finding a lynch mob in my inbox. In a conversation, I could give in to the temptation of looking for the approval of people who are close to me in the project and have this get in the way of a difficult discussion. This clearly does not happen in Debian because there are no cabals. And sometimes moods are high and I may stop paying attention to what you're trying to say and pay attention only to rebut what you are saying. And you might be right, but are you aware that grammar doesn't really work the way you seem to think it does? Sometimes we have a hard time understanding what others are trying to say. Do you know what I'm trying to say? So the payoff of all this is that we can be conscious of being in the process of working both on the relationship and on the outcomes, but without confusing the two. I may be working on the outcome and thinking practically about the problem and the solution, and I may be working on the relationship, trying to smooth different cultural positions or misunderstandings or ironing out difficulties in the language. If I intermix the two, if I think that that your solution sucks because you wrote it in a stupid way or something, that's the problem that we should try to avoid. Then focus on interest, not on position. So the idea is, I understand what you are proposing, but why do you need it? We may not agree on the strategies that are currently on the table, but we might find that we agree on what problems need to be solved. It helps to keep an open mind to the other side of the argument to see beyond the strategy. So there's a problem and you propose to solve it without system D or with system D. And I don't really want to get into another system D discussion. Would you be okay if we looked at the problem itself, try to understand it better, and try to figure various possible ways of solving it, for example? And sometimes this kind of reminds me of the XY problem. So like, okay, you propose a solution, but what is your actual problem? Let's talk about that, because maybe that there could be other solutions. Or what in nonviolent communication is the idea of people may agree on needs and disagree on strategies. But until you know that you agree on needs, it's really difficult to talk about strategies. Invent options for mutual gains. So this is the intelligent quadrant of the Carlo Maria Cipolla graph. Try to look for things that benefit to self and to others. One can listen to the others and not make a final decision until everybody feels that they have been heard. And people should clearly explain their intention and what they want out of the conversation. Insist on using objective criteria. For example, your idea can never be good if you wrote it with nano. Right? I mean, seriously. Make sure that the conversation stays on topic and that it is productive. Try to find out what the other's intentions are, keep an open mind, and don't give in to pressure or threats. Everybody is in charge of keeping the others committed to the conversation. Everyone is responsible for keeping the conversation useful, and everybody is responsible for trying to keep the relationship healthy. It's kind of the three axes of the graphs. And know your best alternative to negotiated agreement. That is, keep in mind other options and regularly reconsider your plan Bs as the discussion continues. Resist the urge to compromise for fear of not getting anything out of the discussion. It may help making the discussion shorter, but it may also leave everyone with a solution that doesn't benefit them that much. And when considering final decisions, you may want to take a step back and consider all possible alternatives to this tentative proposal. I think in Debian we do this pretty well already. It's actually, there's always another step of seeing if there's a better thing, and sometimes we never get to the end of a discussion, but it's actually important to do that to a certain point. So that was all. A recap of the key takeaways. There is benefit to self, benefit to others, and trying to invest in a healthy relationship.
You can and should learn what drives you.
And you can try to turn conflict into actionable change.
Okay. We have time for a few questions. First one is from Boyo. How can Boyo? I often find picky code reviews help me write better code.
I switched on the microphone.
Okay.
So we kind of replied to this a bit on the pad already. I think it's a very good question because one wants to ensure that one can learn. And I think it needs negotiation because there might be people who want to get nitpicked on and or who can use that. And then there's also a way to do it. Like maybe the reviewer is going beyond what is needed to learn. And maybe people can also feel controlled and policed or actually lose self-worth if they get 5 gigantic nitpick rounds which contain 90% of useless information. So I think it's kind of important to talk about it and mention one's own needs.
Yeah, similarly, I would think that it depends. I have a wait. I think that it depends on what are the priorities of the people who review and the people who are reviewed. Um, Sometimes I may be in the mood for long nitpicking that may help improve my code quality. Sometimes I may be more in the mood for being told that I actually fixed the issue in an acceptable way. If the things are mixed, then I may always feel like an outsider because people keep telling me that what I do is never okay. Or I feel not challenged because, or I have a hard time entering into a team because I don't get to learn the practices of the team. So things could change a lot, and also the reviewer may not always be in the mood for writing lengthy nitpicks and teaching things and explaining things. So I think it depends, and I think what the worth thing is to talk about it.
Okay, next question is, are the slides for this talk going to be put online?
Yes, we uploaded them, so they should appear on the page of our talk normally, I think. But Enrico will also upload it to his blog at https://enricozini.org.
Not
No?
yet, but I will.
You will
soon.
do it. Yes.
I posted a temporary link on IRC, and I'll add one to the path too. Done.
Okay, I think we can wait a bit for more questions. Right now there are not more. Okay, so no more questions. So then thank you for your talk.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.